stones. A great man once said, "I know not what World War III will be fought with, but World War IV will be fought with stick and stones," says Albert Einstein. And that is exactly the path we're heading for if we continue and allow chemical weaponry. Okay, so first of all, right, on the idea of how but before that, right, let's talk about how they characterize it as a weapon used exclusively for militants. Now, I think you are delusional to think that they will be used exclusively for militants. Here's the problem why. It's not going to be effective. Every military base on Earth will be prepared for a chemical weapons attack. But do you know who will not be prepared for? The massive, unprotected civilian population. And that is one huge issue with your argument. You completely ignore the fact that civilians exist in this world, even that it's a law. The international humanitarian law exists to protect civilians. But before that, right, today I will rebut to them, rebut on the ideas of shifting norms. And number two, all countries can produce chemical weaponry. Number three, chemical weapons make it such that there will be no thank you, a mutually assured destruction. And number four, banning weapons are inefficient and ineffective. Okay, and then I'll bring out to you on my point of how the legitimization of such a means will result in the escalation of violence because it warrants a proportionate response, and why this is retrogressive to the disarmament movement and in turn is pernicious for the world as a whole. On the idea of shifting norms, that, well, war has advanced to a point, right, where the weapons used are no longer your conventional guns and missiles, and it is now advanced to chemical weaponry, and that, like, small nations are going to use it to level the playing field. The problem with this is that you completely ignore the fact that rogue states will also and definitely use this chemical weaponry on civilians, the massively unprotected civilians, and how, like, even if, right, no thank you, and because exactly the reason why rogue states are going to use it as such regardless, right, when you allow it, right, you are sending a message that it's okay to use it, and that it's okay to use it on everyone, because they are never going to abide by your laws anyways. But more than that, right, you talk about how all countries can produce chemical weaponry. And while it is true that anyone can whip up sarin gas, you also ignore the fact that sarin gas is extremely torturous to begin with, and that you completely ignore the fact that IHL calls for a humane way to end a militant's life. No thank you. More expensive nerve gas, no thank you. We need to be produced more expensively, and the method of delivery, which is also expensive, you are also not factoring in. So what this means is that, right, your poorer nations will never be able to deliver your weapons in a humane way that you wish for them to occur. So you are basically ignoring the fact that there are real-world restrictions to chemical weaponry. And thirdly, no thank you, and that how, like, chemical weaponry, right, have provide a mutually assured destruction. The problem with this is that chemical weaponry are simply not nuclear weapons. They will not completely wipe out your military base. They will not completely wipe out all your missile sites. What this does, right, is basically have a or rather, if they are prepared, right, you do no harm at all. If they are unprepared, well, they won't be, because they are military base. They are there to be prepared. So what this does, right, is provide an assured retaliation that will cause an even huge, more massive casualties, because they're not going to retaliate with simply your chemical weaponry. No, thank you. And lastly, right, on the point of how banning weapons, right, is bad. Like, okay, just because, right, banning weapons might be ineffective doesn't mean that it's okay to go ahead and allow it. We cannot prevent all murders, but you don't see me go out there and legalizing murder anyways, right? Because we understand, right, while it's going to happen, we cannot agree with it in principle by allowing it. It contravenes exactly what IHL stands for. And on a side note, right, 80% of chemical weaponry has been cleared, as with, according to, like, statistics are. But on to my point of why the legitimization of such a means will result in the escalation of violence. Okay. First of all, we understand that wars are started with threats and small skirmishes, when threatened countries need to stock up in order to protect their sovereignty. But we have to understand, right, we are arguing in the context of not just deterrence anymore, we are arguing in the context of a war. So whatever form of deterrence you're talking about here is already out of the window, and we're assuming the worst case scenario, a war going on. And what happens in the war? Weapons are going to be used, chemical weaponry in your paradigm will be produced and will be deployed. And what this will do, right, this caused huge casualties, not just on the militants, but in fact lesser on the militants and more on the civilians, because not all civilian population, especially in a huge wide open area, are going and urban population are going to be prepared for such an attack. But why in particular chemical weaponry then? You are also ignoring the fact that chemical weaponry weapons, right, are uncontrollable and indiscriminate. What this means is, right, you are not going to take it in a minute. You're not going to be able to control each and every single gas particle that goes into a person's body. You're not going to, unlike a bullet, right, you cannot like actually direct it exactly to where it shoots. You can say that, oh, I want to strike on this building, but what happens is, right, what if the gas doesn't disappear like magically as you told it to be so? Because you have never really characterized how your chemical weaponry is, right? Everything under the sun, right, will be used as chemical weaponry as long as I call it a chemical weapon, right? But okay, please.
In both paradigms, chemical weapons will exist anyway. So if chemical weapons are truly as destructive and devastating as you say they are you content with a world where only non-state actors have them and they are left unchecked?
Good point. But here's the thing, right? You're ignoring the fact that by banning it, right, you're also regulating it. Just by allowing it, you're also regulating it. So under our paradigm, right, what happens is, right, we regulate it, we don't allow it, we disagree with it. But under your paradigm, right, you allow it, you understand the fact that civilians are going to be killed regardless, and you still allow it in principle anyway. I don't see how this is upholding IHL laws, IHL in any way, okay? Secondly, right, on my point of why this is retrogressive to the disarmament movement. The disarmament movement, right, is a movement to bring about the elimination and reduction of nuclear arms. Very simply, right, if nuclear arms were ever to be used, it will definitely be an end game for everyone on Earth. There is no question about that, right? But the thing is, right, beyond the big states such as the United States and France, states that are relatively rational and won't use states, you also have states such as India, Pakistan, Israel, Iran, who are trying to develop, North Korea, mind you, that will use it because they are forced to, or because they're simply, quite frankly, insane. But here's the thing. Due to the consequences in the proportional response scenario, right, when you provide them with a weapon as damaging as chemical weaponry, you're forcing them to go on to the next level, which is nuclear warfare. You're forcing them, like, well, I mean, if you have to respond, right, if someone's going to punch you, you're not going to poke them, you're not going to stand there and hope it stops, you're going to like punch them even harder so that they stop. So when someone attacks you with chemical weaponry and like huge portion of your civilian population is damaged, right, what you're going to do, right, is, well, okay, time to use my nukes, time to deploy with my weapons, and time to make it even worse than theirs, so that hopefully they will stop. So what this scream is about, right, and again, right, in the context of war, right, is a mutually assured destruction, but in this case, it's not no longer a deterrence, but an actual scenario that will happen. So what have I really shown you today? I've shown you how chemical weaponry, right, will be used on civilian population regardless, and how regulating it by allowing it, right, is not going to let your rogue states be aware and like not use them on civilians, and how like under our model, right, we understand the fact that countries are going to react the way they do, and lastly, right, how this is retrogressive to the disarmament movement and in turn contravenes what IHL is about.